Have you ever wondered what the behaviors are like with a foster child? Well, in this episode, we're going to talk all about that. So I guarantee you that if you know somebody or you are in the foster care community, one of the things that gets blown way out of proportion is behaviors. And yes, behaviors can be an issue with foster children, but behaviors can be an issue with every child. And so in this episode, I'm really hoping to tackle this topic of behaviors. What is the same, what is different, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, some of the reasons why there might be behaviors. So let's just get right into it. The first thing is to remember that foster children are just children. A 6-year-old is going to have certain kinds of behaviors. A 12-year-old is going to have certain kinds of behaviors. A 2-year-old is going to have certain kinds of behaviors. We all expect a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old to somewhat throw themselves on the ground and throw a tantrum because that's part of the process of growing up during that age. Now, there's severity. Some people's terrible twos are easy. Some people's terrible twos are miserable, but that just goes with the difference of children. Now, here's what is different. As you went through your classes, or if you haven't gone through your classes yet, you learned about actual age and cognizance in age. And here's the thing. So if you have a 6-year-old that really is more like a 4-year-old, then that 6-year-old is not going to have typical 6-year-old behaviors. That child's probably going to have behaviors more like a 4-year-old. And so that's part of the difficulty with foster parenting is that you receive these children and you have no idea what their cognitive age actually is, and you learn that over time, and you figure it out pretty quickly. So let's talk about what are some of the differences, though, between a foster child and your bio children or a child that hasn't been put through the foster care system, meaning they haven't been subjected to a tremendous amount of trauma. And trauma creates all sorts of behaviors. So this is what my wife and I experienced. Now, let me preface this with we generally took older children. We took our youngest child that we took in was 8 most of the time. So 8 to about 13, 14 years old is the range that we took in. So again, some of this is going to be a little different, but here's what we experienced. We experienced more lying, more than normal. The second thing we experienced is they were sneakier. They were sneakier. Foul language. Again, remember, we have older children, so we experienced more foul language than our bio children. Here's the big one. We experienced a lot of denying of doing anything wrong. They could be caught red-handed and they will still deny it. And that sort of goes in with lying, but lying and denying are two different things. To me, lying is before you get caught with true evidence. Denying is when everybody knows, including, everybody that's a part of the situation knows what happened and they deny what actually happened. Storing up items. So, stealing food and hoarding and doing some things of that nature. And I'm going to talk about all of these because they all have reasons behind them. And then finally, showing emotions in a negative way. And again, foster children of all ages can do this, but showing emotions in negative ways. And so, let's just start with the top and talk about lying. So I can tell you that lying sometimes is a taught behavior. The birth parents didn't tell them that they should lie, but we all know that children mimic what their adults do. Meaning, if you're sneaky, your children are going to be sneaky in most cases. If you lie, your children are going to lie because they're going to model after you. And so what happens is a lot of these children's parents, lying is part of survival. And I'm not, in our house, just to be fair, the punishment if you don't lie is way less than if you do lie, because we've tried to teach our children that lying is bad. But I can tell you that our adoptive daughters will tell you that when they told the truth, they got removed from their home. When they lied, a lot of times they didn't. So lying is good, telling the truth is bad. Now, we all know that that's not true, but that's the harsh reality of their reality. When they told the truth, bad things happened. When they lied, they got to stay with the people they loved. So guess what? Lying was part of their DNA. Now, they didn't lie constantly, but on big things, absolutely. Sneaky. Well, from our girls' perspective, in their environment, you had to be sneaky. That's how you got things done. You know, lying and sneaky can sort of go hand in hand, but that's how they got things done. Foul language. Well, guess what? They lived in an environment that everybody used foul language, and guess what? That became part of them. Now, we had to help teach them when it was appropriate and when it wasn't, but it was their environment. It's what they grew up with. So why would I not expect them to say some of the things that were said inside their environment? So again, I don't know about you, but you know, it's sort of like if you have children and you have that 2-year-old, right, or that 1-year-old or whatever, and you say something that you didn't want to say, it slipped out, and next thing you know, your child's repeating what you just said, and you went, oh my goodness, I didn't mean to do that. Well, this is the same thing. Denying doing anything wrong. Well, this is a survival technique for a lot of these children. And so, again, I'm not condoning any of these behaviors. I'm just trying to help you understand these behaviors come with reasons. Storing up items. Many children that come in to foster care come in with nothing. They had nothing. When they got a meal or when they got something, it was a treat, and so they hid it because they didn't want it to be taken from them. And so that again is a learned behavior. And then finally, showing emotions in a negative way. Well, again, sometimes in the environment that these children come from, showing emotions in a negative way actually is a positive because you get more because of it. In our world, it's a negative, but again, understand where they came from. So then you put trauma on top of all this. You put fear and trauma and all of those emotions on top of it, and it compounds all these things. And so just understand that your foster children are just children, but they probably grew up in an environment that was different than yours, and they were exposed to things that were different than you probably exposed your children to. And so that's where some of this comes from. Birth parents, I said this again, have a huge influence over how your foster children act. If they allow them to talk back to them, of course they're going to talk back. If they allow them to use foul language, they're going to use foul language. If they allow them to lie and don't correct them, they're going to allow that. And so birth parents' influence on that child is huge. And so understand that it's part of their DNA. This is just what they grew up with. Our foster children came in with a little bit of an edge. They came from an area that was a little rough, an area of town that was a little rough. And so our kids came in with a little bit of an edge, or some people would say a little bit of an attitude. And so here's the difficult part. The environment that we live in, that's not acceptable. But my wife and I had to be very careful because we couldn't take that edge away from our foster children because the goal was for them to go home. And they need that edge to survive in their environment. And so there was this constant battle of trying to help them understand when they could have the edge and when they couldn't have the edge. And we always leaned on the side of allowing them to have the edge because, again, the goal was for them to go home. If we took the edge away from them, we would have actually put them in danger. And most people don't think about that. Some of these things, some of these what we consider behaviors are life skills. Some of these things help them survive in their environment. And if you take those away from them, guess what? You're putting them at a disadvantage when they go home. And again, there's this balance that foster parents have to deal with. So here's the big ones. You're going to have to discipline, we've talked about this multiple times, but you're going to have to discipline these children very differently. You're going to have to be way more lenient. You're going to have to allow them to get away with things that you wouldn't normally let your bio children get away with. And I promise you one thing, your bio children are going to notice it and they're not going to be happy about it. And you know what? They're going to say things like, this isn't fair. And I'm not going to tell you how to deal with your bio children, but I'll tell you how we dealt with ours. We said, you're right, it's not fair. And life isn't fair, and I'm sorry. The other thing my wife did is, again, we took older children, is we would talk to our children about, you've lived with us for 8, 10, 12, 15 years, and so you've had that much time to learn those rules. They've lived with us for 3 months. We can't expect them to know the rules like you do in 3 months that took you 15 years, and you still break some of these rules. And so they're not going to like it. They're not going to like the fact that there's different punishments, but it is what it is. When you become a foster parent, you just have to understand that you're going to run your house in 2 channels. One for your foster children, one for your bio children, and you're going to bring them as close together as possible, but in a lot of cases, they can't be the same. You're always going to show more grace, more love towards your foster children when it comes to discipline than your bio children. My bio children know that I love them regardless. My foster children do not. So I can discipline my bio children, and they know that I love them. When I discipline my foster child, they question if I love them anymore. And so this is a balance that you have to play with. Now, again, you're probably thinking, well, yes, you only take older children, but this is true with younger children. Now, babies is different. But once they get to be about 1 or 2 years old, these same dynamics come into play. And they're going to be questioning if you really love them or not. And so this becomes a bit of tension for you when it comes to discipline. Now, finally, let's talk about what discipline tools do you have? And the answer is you have very few. You can't grab the child. You can't force the child. Unless it's something in safety, meaning if a child's going to touch their hand on a hot stove, you can grab their hand and pull it away. But that's because that could harm them if they did that. We had a foster child that did Taekwondo. And one of the rules in our house is that when you start something, you have to finish it. And so it was 8 weeks. It was an 8-week class. She was about 4 weeks or 5 weeks in. And she said, I don't want to go. And so my wife convinced her to go and said, you need to finish, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, my wife could not have forced her into the car because that's against the rules. You can't spank. You can use things like timeout. You can use redirection. You can use all of those types of tools, but you cannot use any form of physical punishment. And so understand that makes it tough to do. And so just know going in that foster children, their behaviors, again, are going to be, in some cases, amplified. But again, they're just kids. We never had true behaviors. Now, there's always the one-off. There's always the horror stories. There's always the other thing. But I will tell you, and this isn't 100%, but I will tell you what I have seen, what I have experienced is foster parents that have really rebellious children, foster children. It's mostly because they're trying to dictate too much, too fast. And they want to put them into this neat little box that works inside their home. And that just doesn't work. And so you're going to have to learn how to be okay with allowing things that you wouldn't normally allow with your foster children or with your bio children to happen with your foster children. And again, everybody's different, but understand that this is one of the more difficult parts about being a foster parent is because, especially if you have bio children, because they're going to see the difference. They're not going to like it, and you're going to feel like you need to do the same thing, and you can't. You just can't. You cannot discipline these children the same way. Think of it this way. If you had a friend of yours and you were watching their children, you would be very careful about how you discipline them, because these are your friends, and you would not want to upset your friends because you discipline their children in a way that they wouldn't approve of. And that is, in a sense, what foster care is like, because you're borrowing these children. They are not yours. Legally, you have guardianship, but they are not yours. They are the bio parents' children, and the goal is to send them back. And so you always have to remember that. And then the second thing is you have to remember your job is not to turn them into you. Your job is to keep them safe and care for them while their bio parents are doing whatever they need to do to get them back. And so it's a really hard line to stay, those guardrails are tough to stay in, and it can create major tension inside your home. But my advice always is give way more love and grace than discipline, and things will work out better. Because eventually, if you do that, they will want to please you. And because they want to please you, they will follow more of your rules. But again, many of these rules are going to be completely foreign to them. I hope you've enjoyed this content. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Think about subscribing. And again, I'll see you next week when we talk about the court system. Have a great day.